Welcome to the deep dive. Have you ever stopped and wondered why some movements, even ones with really brilliant spiritual ideas, and our source material for this deep dive digs right into that paradox. It gets us thinking about, say, two historical religious figures.
Yeah, one who travels everywhere, writes constantly, starts communities on like 3 different continents,
Yeah.
builds these frameworks that, well, you can still see traces of them thousands of years later.
Okay. Impressive. And the other one?
The other has maybe equally deep spiritual insights, gets attention from all over the world,
Yeah.
but then just poof, gone from the history books.
No, that's, yeah, a really stark contrast. So what's the core idea here? What does the source say is the fundamental reason for this difference?
Well, it gets down to a pretty crucial point. Having great theology or these brilliant insights, it's just not enough on its own. You need something else.
Ah, okay. And that something else is?
The source calls it institutional wisdom. Basically, knowing how to build something that lasts.
Right. And this is where that fantastic kitchen analogy comes into play, isn't it?
Exactly. The source paints this picture of movements having, all the ingredients for a magnificent feast, but they refuse to actually cook.
Because they think kitchens are what? Inherently corrupting?
Yeah, something like that.
Hmm.
They'd rather just talk about the recipes forever instead of actually, making the meal that could feed people for generations.
It's such a vivid way to put it. It really highlights what happens when you ignore the practical stuff.
It really does. And that analogy, it kind of sets up our mission for this deep dive perfectly. We're going to try and pull out the key principles for building communities that can actually sustain themselves.
Drawing on historical examples and this framework from The Tale of Two Approaches.
Yep. We want to understand why things like clear boundaries, organizational structures, why they're just as vital as the core beliefs themselves if you want something to endure.
Okay, let's get into it then. So when we talk about building to last, the source brings up this idea of protective pillars.
Right. And it's important to see these not as like arbitrary rules just for the sake of rules.
More like solid walls for a house, something clear and defining.
Exactly. Like walls, especially, in a world with thousands and thousands of denominations, like the source mentions over 45,000 Christian ones. You need clear doctrinal lines.
Yeah. Otherwise, you get lost in a diversity flood, as the source calls it. Just too much noise, no focus.
Precisely. These pillars help serious communities, people who really want to build something, to stay focused instead of constantly getting sidetracked by internal squabbles.
They act as a kind of filter or a guidepost.
Yeah, filter and a guide. They define who you are as a community.
Okay, and the source lays out 15 of these pillars. Now, we probably can't dive deep into every single one.
No, that'd take forever.
Right, but maybe we can look at a few key examples from the different categories, just to get the principle behind them. Let's start with the first group, the core theological pillars. What's a good example there?
Okay, so in terms of core beliefs, a really fundamental one mentioned is Trinitarian orthodoxy.
Defining God as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Exactly. One triune God. This isn't just abstract theology. It sets the absolute foundation. It defines who is at the center, preventing fragmentation over the most basic identity questions.
So it anchors everything right from the start. Are there others in that core belief category that act as similar kinds of walls?
Definitely. Another one the source highlights is called community building commitment.
Which sounds pretty practical.
It is. It's basically a pillar that says, look, we're actually committed to building something lasting here, not just debating theology endlessly.
So it attracts people who want to build, not just talk.
Right. It prioritizes practical development, honoring conviction and relationship. It channels the community's energy into actually doing something constructive instead of getting stuck in perpetual arguments. These clear definitions mean you know what you stand for and who you're inviting to join.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so moving from those foundational beliefs, what about the next category? Worship and practice. How do boundaries work there?
Well, for worship and practice, the source gives examples like open communion practice. Meaning welcoming all baptized believers to communion on Sundays, no matter their specific denominational background.
So it sets a boundary against being overly restrictive.
Exactly. It rejects creating artificial barriers around something central like communion. It prioritizes unity among believers in that key act of worship, keeping the community inclusive where it really counts. It helps build internal cohesion.
Okay, I see. And are there other practice-related pillars that define maybe shared behavior or discipline?
Yeah, another clear one is apostolic abstinences. This goes back to Acts 15.
Right, things like abstaining from idols, sexual immorality, food offered to idols, or rather, things strangled, eating blood.
Yep, those specific things. And the source includes modern equivalents like pornography under sexual immorality or modern idols. These are presented as kind of non-negotiable boundaries for how you live as part of the community.
So they're not just random rules.
No, they define a shared ethical standard. They help minimize conflict over basic conduct and ensure everyone's kind of on the same page, presenting a unified way of life. The source sees these as a form of like quality control for daily living.
So it's not just what you believe, but how you actually live it out together. Okay, finally, let's touch on that third category, baptismal and authority pillars. Give us a key example there.
This group defines how you understand authority and who belongs. A really critical one is biblical authority and sufficiency.
Meaning the Bible is the final word.
Yes, and crucially, it rejects claims of ongoing new prophetic revelation that would supersede or equal Scripture, like from figures the source mentions, Ellen White or some modern apostles.
Ah, so it prevents confusion about where truth comes from.
Exactly. It stops the kind of internal chaos that can happen when you have multiple people claiming direct, conflicting divine messages. It establishes a single, agreed-upon source of ultimate authority.
So it clarifies leadership and truth. Okay, let's pull back a bit. What's the overall point here? Why do all these boundaries, theological, practical, authority-based, why do they matter so much for building something that lasts?
Look, they're absolutely vital. The source really hammers this home. Institutionally speaking, communities without clear boundaries just burn all their energy managing internal disagreements. They're always putting out fires.
Whereas those with clear standards, like it says Paul's churches had.
They can actually focus their energy outwards, on building, on mission, on growth. These pillars let you quickly see if someone's compatible, theologically and practically.
So you avoid vague conflicts down the line by being specific up front.
Exactly. It's about honesty and clarity from the start.
Which ultimately makes them more effective. The goal isn't just to argue, but to build these strong local communities that act as effective vehicles, right? Taking people somewhere.
Precisely. Vehicles taking members towards, eternal life, as the source puts it, not just endless debating societies stuck in the mud.
Okay, so seeing these principles in action really makes them click. And the sources dive into these historical paradigms, showing the architecture of endurance. This part is fascinating, starting with the apostolic model. Paul wasn't just a preacher.
No, he was a builder. He built systems. The source even calls it almost like a franchise model for Christian communities.
A franchise model, really? How so?
Well, think about it. He combined deep spirituality with, frankly, really smart practical methods. His success formula involved things like intensive leadership development.
Training locals like Timothy and Titus.
Exactly. Then he created written standards. His letters basically lay down the doctrine. He set up financial networks, collection systems between churches. He did quality control with follow-up visits. And he had this amazing cultural wisdom, adapting his approach without compromising the core message.
That's remarkably organized.
It is. And that institutional DNA he created, it survived for millennia. You can literally trace lines from his work to church structures today.
Incredible. But he wasn't the only one using these methods, right? The source mentions Mark in Egypt.
Oh, absolutely. Mark's mission to Egypt around 45 CE is just an amazing example of this apostolic approach working across cultures. He set up communities in Alexandria, really focusing on developing local leaders and integrating with the culture.
And the result?
It's staggering. Starting maybe with fewer than 100 people, the Coptic Orthodox Church in Egypt now claims over 10 million members, almost 2,000 years later. That's endurance. That's institutional multiplication on a massive scale.
10 million, wow. And then you have Thomas over in India.
Yeah, the Indian miracle. Thomas starts his work around 52 CE, building institutions across huge cultural divides on the Malabar coast.
And the legacy there.
Today, you've got over 6 million St. Thomas Christians in Kerala and Tamil Nadu. It's one of the oldest continuous Christian populations anywhere outside the Mediterranean. His tomb in Chennai is still there, a physical reminder of that lasting work.
It's amazing how these structures held. What about the Byzantine example with Andrew? The source calls it an institutional masterpiece. Why?
And it really was. Andrew is traditionally seen as founding the church in Byzantium, which later became Constantinople.
Which was initially a fairly minor city, right?
Relatively speaking, yes. But that modest church plant he started, it became the foundational bedrock for the entire Greek Orthodox Church.
Which today is huge.
Huge. Over 260 million Christians worldwide, Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, others, they trace their institutional lineage right back to Andrew's initial community building efforts. It's just a mind-blowing legacy from a solid foundation.
Truly impressive. Okay, one more historical case. The Ethiopian achievement with Frumentius. This one sounds like a movie plot.
It really does. So St. Frumentius gets shipwrecked in the 4th century on the coast of what was ancient Ethiopia, the kingdom of Aksum.
Okay.
And somehow, he manages to gain influence at the royal court. He ends up playing a key role in converting King Azana to Christianity.
Wow, but here's the crucial bit, right? He didn't just stop there.
No, and this is key institutional wisdom. He traveled all the way to Alexandria to be officially consecrated as the first bishop of Ethiopia by St. Athanasius himself.
Why was that so important?
It guaranteed apostolic succession. It gave the new Ethiopian church legitimacy, connecting it back to the wider established Christian world. It wasn't just a standalone thing, it was part of the larger body.
Smart. And the result of that move?
Well, today the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church has something like 45 million members. They've survived over 1,600 years of incredible upheaval, conquests, occupations, persecutions.
And developed their own unique traditions, like the gaze language.
Exactly. Unique traditions, but anchored in that apostolic foundation Frumentius secured. It shows how these institutions, when built right, could endure through the fall of empires, massive religious shifts, centuries of chaos, all because the founders understood that truth needs structure to survive.
That really drives home the point about institutional durability. And one last historical point the source makes, looking at the 7 churches of Revelation in Asia Minor. What's fascinating there is why they eventually disappeared.
Yes, this is a really critical insight. Despite the theological issues mentioned in Revelation, these communities actually survived and stayed organizationally strong for over 1,300 years. 13 centuries.
So they didn't just collapse from internal rot, which you might expect.
No, the source makes the powerful point that they were effectively murdered, wiped out by systematic ethnic cleansing in the early 20th century.
So the lesson isn't that they failed internally?
The lesson is that strong institutions, ones with clear boundaries and solid structures, can survive immense external pressure, theological debates, cultural shifts for incredibly long periods. Their demise wasn't due to poor institutional design after all that time.
Incredible. Okay, so we've seen how some movements built things that lasted incredibly long. But let's loop back now to that paradox we started with. Why do some movements, even those with maybe superior theology, end up creating such inferior institutions that they just vanish?
Right. This is what the source labels the institutional legacy paradox.
Yeah.
And the pattern it observes is pretty stark. You get brilliant spiritual insights, but you combine that with an aversion to building institutions.
And the result is?
Historical disappears. They just don't last.
Okay, so what are these common aversions? What attitudes actually stop them from building effectively?
Well, the source lists a few common ones. There's this belief that, organization corrupts spirituality, so they actively avoid any real structure.
Okay, what else?
Then there's the idea that boundaries are unloving. This leaves them to try and embrace everything and everyone without any clear definition of who they are or what they stand for.
Which leads to chaos, I imagine.
Pretty much. Another is thinking that institution building is worldly, so they only focus on the purely spiritual, neglecting all the practical necessities.
Like finances, leadership structures, planning.
Exactly. And finally, the idea that doctrine divides. So they end up emphasizing subjective feelings or experiences over clear, objective truths that could unite them.
So it really does come back to that kitchen analogy again, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
By shunning the very organizational tools, the kitchens, that could actually amplify their spiritual insights and sustain them, they essentially, as the source puts it, starve their communities. They prevent themselves from nourishing the next generation.
That's a harsh but probably accurate consequence. And to counteract this tendency, the source introduces one more key idea: transportation theology.
Yes, this is a really helpful concept for understanding the purpose of the institution.
Okay, unpack that for us. What is transportation theology?
The basic idea is that the local church, or really any community built for a shared purpose, isn't the final destination itself. It's a vehicle.
A vehicle, like a bus or a train.
Exactly. It's a means of transport designed to take its members to the actual destination. In the source's context, that destination is the New Jerusalem, described as a real heavenly place where Abraham is right now.
So the church isn't the end goal, it's the way to the end goal.
Precisely. And making this distinction, the source argues, helps avoid two really deadly errors.
Okay, what are those?
The first error is thinking the church, the vehicle, is the destination.
What happens then?
Well, if you think you've already arrived just by being in the vehicle, you stop traveling. You stop moving forward. The community becomes stagnant, self-focused, and end in itself.
Okay, that makes sense. And the second error?
The second deadly error is the opposite, thinking you don't need the vehicle at all. You think you could just skip the messy work of building and maintaining the community, the institution.
And just get to the destination on your own.
Right. But the source argues you'll likely never arrive without the vehicle designed to get you there. You need the community, the structure, the support.
So it's about finding that balance. You need to build strong, well-organized local communities, good vehicles with clear boundaries.
That function effectively to actually transport people towards that ultimate destination. It's about effectiveness in fulfilling the purpose.
Not just having a nice-looking vehicle sitting in the driveway or thinking you can teleport.
Exactly. It requires, specific standards so people know what they're signing up for. It needs institutional wisdom so the vehicle actually runs and doesn't break down halfway. It needs that eternal perspective, remembering where you're actually going. And it needs practical love so the journey itself builds people up rather than tearing them down.
The ultimate aim being communities that are so effective as vehicles that they successfully carry generations towards their intended lasting purpose.
That's the goal.
Well, we've certainly covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've really dug into the tale of two approaches, and I think highlighted that critical connection between deep spiritual ideas and solid practical institutional wisdom.
Yeah, the historical examples in that framework really show that the communities that last, regardless of their specific beliefs, are the ones that weren't afraid to embrace clear boundaries and get organized.
That vehicle metaphor really sticks, doesn't it? Highlighting that the success, the longevity, depends so much on the design and the upkeep of the community itself, not just on dreaming about the destination.
It's about both the journey and the vessel.
Yeah,
You need both to work.
definitely. So let's leave our listeners with a final thought to chew on. If this institutional wisdom and these clear boundaries are so vital for religious communities to survive and thrive for centuries, how might those same principles apply elsewhere?
Right, the principles of disciplined structure, of having a well-defined purpose.
How could they apply to maybe any long-term project you're working on or business you're building, or even just a personal habit you're trying to make last?
That's a great question. What kitchens might we be avoiding in our own efforts? Kitchens that could actually help us build something nourishing and enduring.
Something to think about. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.